Which to that end, like it's so messed up on so many different levels. And even inside of like, there's that awareness, that observer in all of us, that even in the moment when something terrible is happening, that there was this outside of me that was like, that's not your problem.
No,
that's not your
Not.
problem. That's not my problem. Like that, don't take that on. But of course you still take that on. And I've been I've lived in so many different bodies in the amount of time that I've lived on this planet. And I look back at that. I look back at that time and I was like, gosh, that size that I was when I was doing all that would be a goal for me now. Like, what did they know? Did they know what they were getting into through the years?
Like for real. I'm Tamika.
And I'm Ashley.
And this is Not Tea podcast.
In this podcast, we talk about our real life experiences of being Black women navigating white wellness.
Which is just a microcosm of the world off the mat.
Is it tea if it's just storytelling?
Let's talk about it.
But
hey girl,
the countdown of it all.
It's so official. My gosh. I mean,
hi, and welcome to us.
Hi. Yeah, this is us. This is conversing with this is two Black girls in Yogalandia. This is
facts.
Two Black women in life.
Yeah. all of both of those places in the USA, which is
USA 2024. Ooh.
We just pause. Now I'm thinking about your post from a few days ago. We just pause and take a deep breath.
Listen. Oh my goodness. I was thinking about, this whole big back phenomenon. Big backs.
Tell me about it.
And how this is like this new language that's coming out, like big folk.
Okay.
Or big booties or thick thighs saving lives. And I like this. I like this terminology, celebratory. But I was thinking about that because we are both yogis, and this has been something that we've both kind of lived with at different times. I have never been your size. Your size is my goal size.
That's endeavor to get. I feel like what you said there just speaks so many volumes of like, it is human that we can so often find something to complain about, or there's a goal we're working towards, but always keeping in mind that where you are right now is potentially someone else's goal.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And it's really hard to remember that when everything in culture is trying to have us continue to endeavor to be something different than what we are. I'm just trying to figure out what the default is. I'm trying to figure out what is the default body, skin color, what does it look like? And once we figure that out, do I want that? I mean, it's just so weird that every single person that I know has some sort of story around wanting their physicality to look different. And it doesn't matter what they look like. It reminds me of back in the day, back when I was going to become a yoga teacher, I had this thing where I was like, okay, let me just lose 50 pounds first. But what's so funny is that I set it at a whole bunch of different weights. So it didn't matter. Well, it was some arbitrary 50. I'm like, wait a minute. I said this at 3 different weights. But there was something about that number 50 that I had to do. And it just, I remember thinking, what am I actually, what is my goal? And why do I have a goal around this? But, walking into a studio and seeing a whole bunch of, smaller bodies was a huge motivator for me to want to change mine.
Yeah.
Before, I felt like I could teach yoga, which was wild because teaching yoga is distilling the teachings of transcendence to people and not, self-loathing. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. And I don't know if I think I may have shared this with you before, but that even came up back in the day with me. Are we allowed to name names? Are we naming names?
I plan on naming all the names.
A certain studio that once we both worked at that talks about work and yoga, but reverse them. When I went through my certification to become a trainer at that studio, there was commentary in my, they call you after you've done there's a big written exam you do, and then there's a teaching practicum that you do to a group of students that are in the 300 hour. And then somebody that was there evaluating will call and tell you, like, yes, you passed, no, you didn't. And either way, here are the notes that come with that. And I remember part of that conversation that was had, and I feel like they were trying to frame it in a, like, we're looking out for you kind of way, but it, like, hurt me so deeply that there was conversation about, well, who will this body have? Like, what's it going to be like for her coming into this space when she doesn't have examples of bodies like hers? Basically, they were being like, she's thick. She's a thick girl. And how's that going to be for her because we don't have thick people teaching things here?
Are we coining the term skinny splaining now? I think we might be coining a new term. Like, what the yeah, okay.
Which, to that end, like it's so messed up on so many different levels. And even inside of, like, there's that awareness, that observer in all of us, that even in the moment when something terrible is happening, that there was this outside of me that was like, that's not your problem.
No,
that's not your problem.
Not.
That's not my problem. Like that, don't take that on. But of course you still take that on. And I've been I've lived in so many different bodies in the amount of time that I've lived on this planet. And I look back at that. I look back at that time and I was like, gosh, that size that I was when I was doing all that would be a goal for me now. Like, what did they know? Did they know what they were getting into through the years?
Like for real. It's, my thing is this. I already had my own bullshit stories before walking into a yoga studio about my body.
Yeah.
I didn't need the studio itself to add to them. You know what I mean? And I remember when I went through my first teacher training and they were like, only assist people who are your same size. And I was like, well, I guess I'm never getting assisted, and I guess I'm never assisting anyone. And seriously, no one would assist me. It took having someone who was similar that finally put their hands on me. Now, at this point, I don't really need or desire hands-on assists, but it was so isolating in the moment to think, like, when those words came out of the trainer's mouth, I was like, no one in this room looks like me. Like, so also, what if the opposite could have been true? What if there was someone that was really, really small and really, really tiny? And actually, I think there was someone who was had a very thin frame. And she's coming to my mind now. And I'm like, well, no one looks like her either. So we just don't get assisted. And I imagine that she, growing up with a sibling who had a hang up about being very thin, I imagine that she has, been through that herself. So it was just so isolating. And I was just like, listen, like, this is not what I'm here for. I'm here to love myself more. And you're helping to create new stories, that I don't need. Now, fortunately, I wasn't young when I did my teacher training. I mean, I could have been 18 or 20, and imagine how that would have formed this core memory about what I need to do or whatever. Instead, it just ignited me to be like, screw this dude. I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to do what is meaningful for me. And I'm going to create something different when I'm through this process, because I'm grown and I know this is wrong. You know what I mean? But
I can't imagine. Also, like, thankfully, we're seeing more and more different types of bodies. But even then, when things were a little bit more homogenous, it's that everybody's body still wasn't the same coming in. Like,
no.
So the teacher is only going to adjust like that.
Right. And
where did that story come from for that person? That's now my brain is like, what's the psychology behind what was going on with them?
I imagine that it was something that was said by someone else that this person just regurgitated, because let's just be honest, that's what a lot of teacher training is. It's not actually distilled information and learning and, what's coming through based on what a lot of people's experiences are instead. And I know that you've had a very different experience, but for me, what I have heard some of my former teachers say, I practiced with their teachers and they said the exact same thing. So I was like, oh, these weren't actually their words or their way of understanding the world. They were literally just regurgitating what their teachers said. So of course, if their teacher said that, then they're going to say the same thing without actually going through a filtering process or a critical lens of, is this right or wrong? And frankly, if I would have had a body that did what they said it should do, then I may not have filtered through that critical lens either. But for sure, every person who is trained by these trainers were still kind of going through this. When they were challenged to do things differently, there was an unlearning that was necessary. And it's just like, oh, but this is the problem with. So here's my thing. How I'm interrupting myself to say, this is the problem with, social media being a conduit of, the yoga studio or yoga teachings, because social media or Instagram is like Vogue magazine. So all of the harm that Vogue magazine did back in the early 80s and 90s, and possibly before, I don't know, because I didn't care earlier, but that's what like Instagram is doing now with Insta Yoga or Yogagram, is creating so much harm because people are seeing hyperflexible, incredibly thin, all these bodies that are looking a particular way. And that's not actually, like, we're in the United States. Like, even if we just go west and over, even if we bring in the UK, that's not the majority of people. That's not even half of people that look like that or their bodies behave in that way. So it's like creating this aspiration of getting your body so perfected to be as a result of a practice that's meant for liberation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Things are clicking into place for my brain now, because I feel like you brought up briefly at the end of a conversation we'd had recently, this on the online nature of things and how that's like messing stuff up. And I was like, wait, but I was thinking more from the lens of like we have online studios, right? So I was like, oh no, we're giving access to people that, wouldn't have access before, or I'm able to teach with stuff, but I wasn't thinking about it through the social media side of stuff.
Well, online studios are using social media in order to grab the attention for people to come to them. But the people who are practicing at home don't look like the practitioners on social media.
Yeah.
So it becomes this aspirational thing. Now, we can also talk about in studio and the fact that teachers oftentimes are young, thin, all the things. They may not necessarily be the better teachers, but they're maybe the most aspirational bodies. And then, so folks that have, bigger bodies or what have you, then have to kind of do the literal most to prove, a worthiness of being there. I know that was my story. I'm like, oh, well, I have to do all of the advanced shapes. I have to do all of the, I have to be like excellent. And I'm like, man, I already deal with Black excellence issues. Now I got to come in here. My body has to do this too. It was so annoying. I mean, but I did the most for so long. So I think, when it comes to online studios and this thought that, yeah, there's a place for everyone. Is there? Because would you want to practice at a studio where you scroll their Instagram feed and you see nothing but people who don't look like you in any way, shape, or form?
No. No. I think also I don't really scroll.
Listen, I don't want to hear about your transcendent ass, okay? Look, I'm talking to all the people who don't meditate for like 4 hours a day, okay? Look.
You know what it is? I'm blessed with humans that know what I want to see. And so I can pop onto my Instagram to post a little something if I need to, and then I can go to my inbox and there's a whole host of like funny videos and a lot of cute animals. And so I feel like
you curated your feed well.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say I do watch a lot of, ceramics.
Yeah. The tiny ceramics. This is
my gosh. The tiny ceramics. I'm like, please, let's do this workshop. I've got to see if I can do it.
And then they're just tiny little flowers out of the pot. Yeah.
It is the best. It is the best. I'm just thinking, like, as a virtual studio owner, though, as virtual studio owners, like looking at what other folks are doing or what they're amplifying is something that matters in order to be able to compete within the space. So I look at what, Glow is doing, what Aloe is doing, what YogaWorks is doing, what Mind Walk Yoga is doing. I look at those things and see, whose voices, bodies, realities they're amplifying. And a lot of what it looks like is get your workout on, and all these things. And I'm just like, just stop calling it yoga, maybe. Like maybe, also like, whatever, call it whatever you want. But, how is that playing into the systems that already create harm?
I mean, in so many ways. How much time do you have? Let me start making a list.
Listen. And there's so many people who are just like, I just don't have the, I don't have the body to, to walk into a class. And I'm just thinking, I remember thinking this way about other things. Like, I don't have the body to try out for the cheerleading squad or the dance team. I don't have the body to do the ballet, whatever. And I'm like, how are we still here? It's like high school.
Yeah. And it's interesting how it's, I feel like it shifts and changes for me. Like each time that I'm like, I feel like I'm good. I'm like in it. We're here. We're doing this. She's cute. Right. And then there'll be a different lane where it's like, oh, but not there. Like I can confidently walk into a yoga space now in a way that, like, I still went to the yoga space because I was getting something from it. But there were times where I was so uncomfortable going into that space and knowing that my body was going to be potentially the largest body in the room here in LA, knowing that my body was probably going to be the only body of color in the spaces that I had available to me to go practice in. And there was a lot of time, especially during my teacher training, where I would like put on the good face and then leave and cry in my car. on the way home, and sometimes not even realizing why, but it's like all that stuff that you're dealing with just to go in and practice. For me,
Yeah.
I guess I was fortunate enough that there was something in it that, well, maybe not, like that I kept going even against the friction and the resistance, because I wanted the knowledge and I wanted the information. But there's not a lot of, I don't know if that was always a good idea that I kept going. I felt like I was doing some harm in order to get some good information. And what if we didn't have to, like, can I skip the piece of the harm?
Yeah. 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 That part.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of my own competitive nature is what kept me going back to the studio, and that wasn't something I needed to foster. I will say I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad that, you know, I had people's whispering in my ear that I was in my own head about certain things, and certain things were also really happening. And it wasn't just fabricated. So for anyone who's going to come at us and be like, oh, well, that's just, no, first of all, just pause and stop and just save that for somebody else. I remember having a practitioner who was in one of my classes, and she came up to me and said, I'm so glad you went through teacher training, because when I applied for teacher training, they said that nobody would want to take my classes because of my weight. And I was astounded, because these were the same people who were like, you're ready now, like come do the thing or whatever. And I was like, damn, like I can't even imagine like having my money ready to take YTT and someone saying, no, like your money's no good here, fat girl, you know, like, what?
Yeah.
What? So I'm so glad that I went in when I did, because frankly, the spiciness of my personality might have come out in very large ways if that would have happened. Because I wouldn't cry in the car. I'd be like, you know, throwing hands, you know what I mean? Like I wasn't as evolved as I am now. And so I probably would have said a lot of things, but what I will say is that I think everyone gets an opportunity to shift, evolve, transition. I'm glad that those folks did.
Yeah.
And since then, you know, I remember being in classes, like I just remember thinking, nobody's going to come to my class. Honey, baby, let me tell you something. Those classes were 60, 70 people deep, because that was the amount of people that would fit in the space. And I just remember thinking, wow, like I remember having a hang up over this, and no, people were coming because they found value. And then the people who were coming were fuller figured, Black, brown, you know, like just people of color in general. And then, but right next to marathoners who were white and thin or whatever, like everyone was coming into this space. And I was like, yes, you know, if you build it, they'll come, you know. So if we can just like get beyond those messages, then people will show up. And I will never forget that. And I'll also never forget this one woman telling me, she said, this is like LA. She's like, your class is like LA. And she said, but you would never be the teacher there. And she was like, and I was like, damn. But she wasn't saying it like you would never be the teacher. She was saying it like, in LA, you would never have the opportunity for you to be the teacher. And what's really funny is, having worked in a virtual studio where so many of my students were from LA, it's amazing how many people are like, I joined this studio because I saw a Black person. I joined this studio because I saw someone who looked like me. I joined this studio. And I was just like, welcome. We're doing things differently now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was just amazing how when you're intentional and you're willing to show up, like if we're willing to just show up anyway, you know what I mean? Like what you're saying, it's incredible how that reach then encourages other people to show up as well.
Absolutely. Almost every single fear that I had being who I am and living in the body that I live in, and trying to show up and teach, every single fear I had at some point, actually multiple points at this point in time, so those have been the very reasons why someone has come up and been like, I come to you because of that. I come because I needed to see that someone that looks like me does that, can do that's possible for me if I want that.
Yeah. I remember seeing your image on a poster at my studio, and I was like, who is this goddess? I was just like, and I was immediately aware that I had never seen a Black body on a studio poster, just in general. And then you were in Fallen Angel, or what is it?
Yeah, you got it.
I'm like, screw that pose. Anyway. And I was like,
I'm so happy to see you, but why you got to be doing all that?
I like you doing the most. I'm not even trying to do that. But it was incredible. And I just was like, and it had nothing to do with size or anything. It had first to do with Black woman repping this major brand and me seeing myself reflected in the face of this Black woman. And then it was also apparent that you were not modeling this Europeanized lens of all the rest of it. You were still just very much you, and that authenticity came through. And I was just like, damn, you know what I'm saying? And it was like, okay, at some point I've got to get to this class because I need to know, first of all, how did she do that shape? And then also I just want to be around her. I need to be around her. I need more role models. I need more people who look like me. I'm tired of being the only one.
It was so exciting for me for multiple reasons when that Houston market opened up for me to come into. One, my family's there, and let's be real, if I'm getting paid to go home, yes.
Listen.
But I remember, I did a bridge training for a group of the teachers that were already at the studio that had been bought down there. And then that first couple of trainings that I did, I was like, look at all these people of color. Oh my gosh. And
yeah,
like I had just never, I'd never had that experience in LA. Like there was always a little sprinkling of us here and there. But the majority of people that were in my trainings in Houston were POCs. That was, and
and they came for you. They came for you. They came for you. We came for you. I know it was not in that particular training, but they came for you. If it would have been anyone else, they would not have turned up and turned out like that. And Houston is so people of the world majority. We are so Black. We are so immigrant. We are so, the Rainbow Nation, like for real is here in this city. And you did not see it in the classes. Now, I will say that my first, YTT, I will say that there were a group of us who, there were several of Black women who went through that training. And then, in like a year or two preceding us, there were a couple of Black women who went through that training. So it wasn't that the studio wasn't diverse in its teachers, but for the most part, the teachers were always at like one studio here, one studio there. Where I was, they weren't. So it was just, but things did slowly start changing. But when you came in and you started changing, they dramatically changed, and people just really started. Oh, you want to see yourself reflected in something, and for all the people who say, "Well, that's not important," that's just that's your obstacle. Okay, and even if it is my obstacle, is it not a worthy thing to address? Is it okay that that there are so many spaces that we will go into and not see ourselves reflected in them?
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'll accept that. That's my obstacle. Great. Now, how do we move forward?
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful.
I am too. And it's having been a person that, I was fortunate to grow up all over this wild world because my dad is ambitious. But I think I grew up in places where beyond me just being, maybe the only Black person in the space, it was like I might have been the only American in the space. I might have been I had a life of being, I am the one here. And so I don't even think that it wasn't until much later in my life that I realized how necessary that was for me. Like, I didn't even know to want for that because it was not my day to day. Right?
Yes, big same. I've always operated in these spaces that were largely white. I had an experience with tokenism is my primary experience before the age of 40, and just things like that were just my reality. How do you know what to even desire if you've never experienced something different? So I just love that.
Sorry,
what were you going to say?
I was just thinking, it's yoga, right? Like, so I now that I know this and I know the richness of like being in a diverse community and seeing other people like me and seeing people that are different than me. I don't want it to be homogenized either way, but like I can't go back. I can't unsee it. I can't unsee it now. And so what is the way forward? And I feel like this is, for me, so much of what the practice is like, okay, we're pulling those threads out of that veil of ignorance. Like, I can't say I don't know anymore. Now I know, and now what am I doing with that? Yeah.
And the way forward is what we're doing. Showing up, being there, creating community, creating spaces that are inclusive, where belonging is fostered without having to put on a mask or code switch or do this or do the other. And I think, as we continue to explore, the microcosm of the world that is Yogalandia and sometimes the yoga community, the beauty and the opposite, I think that we'll have an opportunity to explore, these themes and how they show up and how they have shown up. My hope is that people will, listen to this podcast, and those who have felt excluded will feel seen, and those who have done the excluding will know and be like, okay, let me do something a little different, or how do I do things a little differently? So, if you're out there and you want to figure out how to do better, then keep listening. Yeah. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to talk about.
May our thick thighs save your lives.
They already have. They already have. Look, I need the ice packs on my back, okay? Because a girl is going through perimenopause, and these hot flashes that's a story for another day.
Another day.
We will see you all later. Until next time, friends. Ciao.
Ciao.